For over a decade, Russia's Black Sea Fleet has been the crown jewel of Moscow's naval power, the symbol of its dominance over the waters between Europe and Asia. Today, that fleet no longer operates from Crimea, not because it was destroyed, not because it retreated temporarily, because Ukraine made it operationally impossible for Russia to maintain naval presence in the territory Moscow seized in 2014. This is not a tactical withdrawal. This is the collapse of a strategic position Russia spent billions to defend and cannot afford to lose. By the time we are done, you will understand why the single most important naval repositioning in the Black Sea since the Cold War just confirmed that Crimea, the territory Putin calls Eternal Russia, is no longer defensible as a military asset. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications because we are tracking the most significant shift in Black Sea military balance in modern history, and what just happened in Sevastopol changes everything about how this war ends. I am going to show you exactly how Ukraine systematically dismantled Russia's ability to operate from Crimean waters. We will cover the specific weapon systems that made Sevastopol untenable, the strategic cascade that forced Russia to abandon ports it has controlled for centuries, and the geopolitical implications of Moscow losing its primary warm-water naval hub. By the end, you will understand why this represents not just a military defeat, but a fundamental reordering of regional power that NATO did not accomplish in 70 years of Cold War pressure. This is the story of how a country with effectively no navy destroyed the operational capacity of one of the world's most storied fleets. The Black Sea Fleet is not just another Russian naval formation. It is the foundation of Moscow's ability to project power into the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and North Africa. Based primarily in Sevastopol since 1783, this fleet has survived Ottoman wars, the Crimean War, 2 world wars, the Soviet collapse, and the initial years of the current conflict. It consists of frigates, submarines, landing ships, minesweepers, and support vessels that enable Russian operations from Syria to Libya. The headquarters in Sevastopol is not merely a port. It is a fortified naval complex with underground facilities, repair yards, ammunition storage, and command infrastructure representing over 2 centuries of continuous development. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, securing permanent control of Sevastopol was the strategic prize that justified international isolation and sanctions. For Ukraine, the Black Sea Fleet represented an existential threat from the war's first hours. Russian ships launched Caliber cruise missiles against Ukrainian cities. Amphibious vessels staged feints toward Odessa that pinned Ukrainian forces to coastal defense. The fleet enforced a blockade that strangled Ukraine's grain exports and threatened the country's economy. Eliminating or neutralizing this fleet became a strategic imperative. The problem was obvious. Ukraine had virtually no navy. Russia sank or captured most Ukrainian naval vessels in 2014. The few that escaped to other Black Sea ports could not challenge Russian dominance. Ukraine faced a dilemma that seemed unsolvable. How do you defeat a navy when you do not have one? The strategic geography of the Black Sea is crucial to understanding what just happened. The Black Sea connects to the Mediterranean through the Bosporus Strait, controlled by Turkey under the Montreux Convention. This convention restricts the passage of warships, meaning Russia cannot easily reinforce the Black Sea Fleet with vessels from other fleets. What Russia has in the Black Sea is what Russia can maintain. Crimea juts into the Black Sea like a dagger pointed at NATO member Romania and toward the Bosporus. Sevastopol sits on the southwestern tip, approximately 160 miles from the Romanian coast and 250 miles from the Bosporus. This position allows Russia to threaten NATO's southeastern flank and control sea lanes essential for Ukrainian and regional commerce. For Russia, losing Sevastopol is not comparable to losing a forward base. It is comparable to losing Gibraltar would be for Britain or Pearl Harbor for the United States. It is identity and capability fused into geography. Ukraine's counter-naval campaign began with asymmetric weapons because symmetric warfare was impossible. The first major success came on April 14, 2022, when Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missiles struck the Moskva, the Black Sea Fleet's flagship. The Moskva was a Slava-class guided missile cruiser displacing over 12,000 tons, equipped with advanced air defense and offensive missile systems. Ukraine fired 2 Neptune missiles from near Odessa. Russian sources initially claimed the ship was damaged by fire and ammunition explosion. Ukrainian sources claimed successful missile strike. What matters is the outcome. The Moskva sank while being towed to port, taking with it the fleet's command and control hub and its most potent air defense platform. This was the first warship sunk by anti-ship missiles since the Falklands War and the largest warship sunk in combat since World War II. The psychological impact was immediate. Russia's fleet, which had operated with impunity, was suddenly vulnerable. But sinking one ship, however symbolically important, does not neutralize a fleet. What followed was a systematic campaign using weapon systems that did not exist in Ukraine's arsenal before the war. Ukraine modified existing drones, developed new ones, and deployed them with increasing sophistication. The naval drones, officially called unmanned surface vehicles, are small, fast, low-profile boats packed with explosives. They cost a fraction of traditional anti-ship missiles, perhaps $250,000 per unit compared to millions for cruise missiles. They can be controlled remotely or operate semi-autonomously. Their low profile makes them difficult to detect with radar. Their speed, up to 50 miles per hour in some models, makes interception challenging. And they can be deployed from virtually anywhere along Ukraine's coastline or even from inland positions. Throughout 2023, these drones achieved what conventional navies could not. On September 13, 2023, Ukrainian drones struck the Rapucha-class landing ship Minsk while docked in Sevastopol. On September 22nd, they damaged the Kilo-class submarine Rostov-on-Don and the landing ship Minsk, again in dry dock. On December 26, 2023, drones struck the landing ship Novocherkassk in Feodosia, destroying it completely with a secondary explosion that suggested it was loaded with ammunition. On February 1, 2024, the corvette Ivanovets was sunk by multiple drone strikes. On March 24, 2024, the landing ship Konstantin Olshansky was destroyed. These were not isolated incidents. This was industrial-scale attrition warfare against a fleet that could not be replaced. Think about what that means for a moment. Ukraine, a country with no operational navy, was systematically destroying Russian naval vessels in Russia's own naval base. The psychological warfare dimension became as important as the physical destruction. Ukrainian forces published drone footage of attacks, showing first-person perspectives as the drones closed on targets. These videos went viral, demonstrating Ukrainian capability while humiliating Russian defenses. Each successful strike reinforced a message. Sevastopol is not safe. No Russian vessel in Crimean waters is safe. That message had strategic consequences beyond the ships destroyed. Russian naval operations changed fundamentally. Ships that previously docked in Sevastopol for extended periods began limiting port time. The frequency of patrols near Ukrainian-controlled coastline decreased. Vessels that conducted missile strikes on Ukrainian cities did so from greater distances, reducing their effectiveness. The Black Sea Fleet was becoming operationally cautious, and operational caution for a navy means reduced capability. But the real shift came when Russia began moving vessels out of Crimean ports entirely. By late 2023, satellite imagery and naval tracking data confirmed a pattern. Russian ships were spending more time in Novorossiysk, a port in Russia proper on the eastern Black Sea coast, than in Sevastopol. Novorossiysk is approximately 150 miles east of Sevastopol, across the Kerch Strait. It is farther from Ukrainian-controlled territory, making drone strikes more difficult, though not impossible. Maintenance facilities there are less extensive than Sevastopol, and the port lacks the underground protection and fortified infrastructure of the Crimean base. This was not an expansion of Russian naval presence. This was a retreat disguised as redistribution. The strategic calculus became undeniable. Every day, a high-value vessel spent in Sevastopol was a day it risked being destroyed by weapons costing less than the fuel the ship burned. Russia faced a choice: accept continuing losses and the humiliation of having its fleet picked apart in its own base, or withdraw to more defensible positions. The cost-benefit analysis favored withdrawal, but withdrawal from Sevastopol carries implications that cascade far beyond naval operations. Here is where the story gets genuinely interesting. Ukraine did not just push the Black Sea Fleet out of Sevastopol through direct attacks. Ukraine made the entire logistical and support infrastructure of Crimea untenable. Starting in 2023 and accelerating through 2024, Ukrainian forces struck ammunition depots, fuel storage facilities, air defense systems, and command posts throughout Crimea using long-range strike capabilities including Storm Shadow missiles provided by Britain and France, and ATACMS missiles eventually provided by the United States. On September 22, 2023, a massive strike on the Black Sea Fleet headquarters in Sevastopol killed dozens of officers, including the fleet commander. This was not just battlefield attrition. This was decapitation of command structure. The pattern became clear. Ukraine was not trying to occupy Crimea through ground assault. Ukraine was making it impossible for Russia to use Crimea as a functional military base. Every ammunition depot destroyed meant vessels could not rearm. Every fuel storage facility hit meant reduced operational tempo. Every air defense battery eliminated meant the remaining facilities became more vulnerable. This is attritional warfare applied to infrastructure rather than manpower. And unlike soldiers, infrastructure cannot be replaced quickly or cheaply under wartime conditions. The confirmation came through official Russian statements and observable changes in deployment patterns. In late 2024 and early 2025, Russian military leadership publicly acknowledged that the Black Sea Fleet's operational headquarters had relocated to Novorossiysk. The careful language described this as an expansion of capabilities and distribution of forces to enhance resilience. The reality was transparent to any observer paying attention. Russia abandoned Sevastopol as an operational naval hub because Ukraine made it indefensible. Ukrainian officials were more direct. On March 15, 2025, Ukrainian military intelligence confirmed that no Russian warships remained permanently based in Crimean ports. Some vessels still made brief stops for specific operations, but the fleet no longer conducted routine operations from Sevastopol or Feodosia. Ukrainian Southern Command stated that the Black Sea Fleet had effectively withdrawn from Crimea, achieving what they described as functional sea control, despite not possessing a traditional navy. This statement was not propaganda. It was confirmable through independent satellite analysis and naval tracking data available to anyone monitoring ship movements. Now let's talk about why this matters beyond the immediate military situation. The Black Sea Fleet's retreat from Crimea represents a strategic defeat that undermines Russia's entire rationale for annexing the peninsula. In 2014, Putin justified seizing Crimea by claiming it was historically Russian territory, where Russian speakers faced persecution. But the strategic reality was securing permanent access to Sevastopol. The political theater was about identity and protecting ethnic Russians. The strategic substance was about the naval base. If Russia cannot use Sevastopol as a naval base, the strategic value of controlling Crimea diminishes dramatically. This creates second-order effects on Russia's negotiating position in any future peace settlement. If Crimea has no military utility, the cost of holding it, including international sanctions and diplomatic isolation, becomes harder to justify. The population needs services and infrastructure Russia struggles to provide under wartime economy. The Kerch Bridge connecting Crimea to Russia has been struck multiple times and remains vulnerable. Every day Russia controls Crimea without being able to leverage its strategic value is a day Russia pays costs for minimal benefit. For Ukraine, this shift fundamentally changes the military balance. Ukrainian grain exports, which were strangled by Russian blockade in 2022, have resumed through a corridor Ukraine established unilaterally after Russia withdrew from the grain deal. Ukrainian commercial shipping operates with increasing confidence because the Black Sea Fleet cannot effectively enforce a blockade while cowering in Novorossiysk. This has direct economic implications. Ukraine's economy depends heavily on agricultural exports. Restored sea access means restored revenue, which means enhanced capacity to sustain the war effort. For NATO, Russia's naval retreat from Crimea represents a dramatic shift in Black Sea security dynamics. Romania and Bulgaria, both NATO members with Black Sea coastlines, face reduced threat from Russian naval power. Turkey's control of the Bosporus gives it enhanced leverage over Russia's ability to reinforce or resupply the Black Sea Fleet. The alliance did not fire a shot, but Ukrainian operations fundamentally improved NATO's southeastern flank security in ways that decades of Cold War posturing never achieved. But there is another dimension to this that deserves attention. The Black Sea Fleet's withdrawal demonstrates the vulnerability of traditional naval power to asymmetric drone warfare. This is not just a Ukrainian innovation. This is a preview of how future naval conflicts may unfold. The United States Navy is paying very close attention to Ukraine's success with naval drones. China is certainly studying these operations as it contemplates scenarios involving Taiwan. Every navy in the world is reevaluating defense against small, cheap, expendable platforms that can sink ships costing billions. The technical challenge is significant. Traditional naval air defense systems are designed to engage aircraft, helicopters, or missiles. They are optimized for high-altitude or high-speed threats. A small drone sitting barely above the water, moving at 50 miles per hour, presents a detection and engagement problem that existing systems struggle with. The radar cross-section is minimal. The speed is too slow for systems tuned to intercept supersonic missiles, but too fast for sailors with small arms to consistently hit. Close-in weapon systems can engage them, but only at very short range, and a swarm of multiple drones can overwhelm defenses through sheer numbers. This is the nightmare scenario for surface navies, and Ukraine just demonstrated it works against a peer military force. Now here is where it gets complicated because this is not a story of unambiguous Ukrainian victory without limitations or Russian failure without possible countermeasures. The Black Sea Fleet still exists. Russia still has submarines operating in the Black Sea capable of launching Caliber cruise missiles. The fleet's withdrawal from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk reduces its vulnerability but does not eliminate its capability. Russian vessels can still conduct operations. They simply do so from a less advantageous geographic position, with longer transit times to operational areas. Russia is also adapting. Vessels now deploy with dedicated anti-drone defenses including machine guns mounted specifically to engage surface threats. Patrol boats accompany high-value ships to screen against drone approaches. Russian forces have developed their own naval drones and deployed them against Ukrainian port facilities, though with less success than Ukrainian operations. The technological competition continues, and Russia has vastly greater resources to dedicate to developing countermeasures than Ukraine has for developing new attack methods. There is also the question of what Russia might do if it concludes that Crimea has become a strategic liability. Some analysts suggest Russia could escalate to regain dominance, potentially using tactical nuclear weapons to create exclusion zones or attacking Ukrainian decision-making centers. Others argue Russia might instead accept the loss and consolidate around positions it can defend, treating Crimea as a frozen conflict zone it formally claims but does not functionally control. Which path Russia takes depends on factors beyond military calculation, including political stability in Moscow and assessment of Western resolve. For Ukraine, the challenge is sustaining and building on these gains. Drone production requires resources, components, and technical expertise. Ukraine depends on Western support for many of these inputs. If Western support diminishes, Ukraine's ability to maintain pressure on Russian naval forces diminishes with it. The success of the past 2 years is not automatically sustainable into the future without continued international backing. There is also uncertainty about whether this naval success can translate into broader territorial gains. Pushing the Black Sea Fleet out of Sevastopol does not mean Ukraine can amphibiously assault Crimea. The peninsula is heavily fortified with Russian ground forces. Naval success alone does not solve the problem of liberating occupied territory, though it certainly removes one major obstacle. What remains unresolved is the sequencing and strategy for translating naval dominance into territorial restoration. But step back and look at what this means in the broader arc of this war. In February 2022, Russia possessed overwhelming conventional military advantage. It had more troops, more tanks, more aircraft, more ships. 2 years later, Ukraine has neutralized or destroyed much of that advantage through asymmetric warfare, Western support, and tactical innovation. The Black Sea Fleet's retreat from Crimea is the naval expression of a pattern playing out across the entire conflict. Russia's quantitative advantages are being systematically degraded by Ukrainian qualitative advantages in targeting, intelligence, and weapons employment. The historical parallel is striking. In World War II, the Soviet Union's Black Sea Fleet operated from Sevastopol until German forces besieged and captured the city in 1942. The Soviets eventually recaptured it in 1944. For 80 years, Sevastopol was synonymous with Soviet and then Russian naval power in the Black Sea. Today, Ukraine has accomplished what Nazi Germany did without occupying a single meter of Crimean territory. They made Sevastopol operationally untenable through standoff strikes and asymmetric platforms. This is not your grandfather's way of war. This is the future arriving ahead of schedule. What we are watching in real time is the collapse of a strategic position Russia thought it had secured permanently in 2014. Every assumption Moscow made about Crimea being defensible behind air defenses and naval power has proven false. Every calculation that Ukraine could not challenge Russian control without a navy has been overturned. The geopolitical implications extend beyond this war. Russia's claim to great power status rests partly on its ability to project military power. That ability is being systematically dismantled by a country Russia claimed did not have the right to exist. The question now is what comes next. Russia will not surrender Crimea without exhausting every option to hold it. Ukraine will not stop pressuring Russian positions while it retains the capability to do so. The next phase of this campaign likely involves continued Ukrainian strikes on Crimean infrastructure to make the peninsula even less viable as a military staging ground. We are also likely to see Russian attempts to regain naval initiative through new tactics or technologies, though the fundamental problem of operating in range of Ukrainian drones remains unsolved. For the international community, this confirms that support for Ukraine translates into concrete, strategic outcomes. Storm Shadow missiles, ATACMS, intelligence sharing, and economic assistance enabled Ukraine to achieve what seemed impossible 2 years ago. The lesson for policymakers is that sustained support works. The question is whether that lesson registers before Western resolve wavers. If this analysis helped you understand why Russia's Black Sea Fleet abandoning Crimea represents one of the most significant strategic shifts of this entire war, subscribe and turn on notifications. We are tracking the next phase of this campaign and how Russia responds to losing its crown jewel naval base. This story is far from over, and we are covering every development as it unfolds. What happens next in Crimea will shape how this war ends. Stay with us.